What is up, guys? Welcome to my full spoiler review for Spider-Man No Way Home. As I've just told you, as you saw in the thumbnail, as you saw in the video title, this is a spoiler-packed review. If you have not seen Spider-Man No Way Home, please do not watch this review first. Go and watch my spoiler-free review. I talk about the movie for a good 16-17 minutes. Don't give anything away that has not already been shown in the trailers. And please go and see this movie without knowing any of the finer details, without knowing any of the secrets, the twists, the reveals, anything like that. You'll have the best experience possible. But if you've already seen the movie, or if for whatever reason you genuinely just don't care about spoilers, which I don't get, but there are some of us out there, let's get into it. So, Spider-Man No Way Home, just to give quick context, is a movie that I've really been looking forward to, but I've been increasingly more frustrated and disappointed and upset at just the amount of supposed leaks, at the amount of chatter, at the amount of rumors, and just constant posts about it on Facebook and Twitter and on YouTube. And it's really a shame that we live in a world to where the internet is just so readily available, so packed with fast added information, that a movie like this just had no chance. No chance whatsoever to be a nice surprise for us Spider-Man and Marvel fans. And even though there's been some things that have been rumored and talked about that were not in this movie, a lot of the biggest surprises, the biggest reveals, you basically would have had to have been social media dark for the past year plus to not have already seen them coming. And that sucks. It was still great to see. It was still great moments. This theater still erupted in applause and cheers during certain moments, but I really wish that I lived in a world to where this movie could have come out and surprised and shocked all of us with what it had in store. But I really enjoyed the movie. Even knowing a lot of what was going to happen, even expecting a lot of the biggest reveals and the biggest surprises, I had a damn good time with it. This is my favorite of the Tom Holland movies. I'm very excited for what is coming after this, or what I think is coming after this, which I'll discuss at the end of this video. And this is one of my favorite Spider-Man movies. I'm somebody that loves the Raimi trilogy. I've always loved the Raimi trilogy, even Spider-Man 3, despite all its flaws. And this, to me, is the best Spider-Man movie that we have gotten since those films. So, we're going to go through the entire plot, very similar to how I did with my Halloween Kills spoiler review. Unfortunately, I could not watch it at home, so I couldn't get quite as in-depth notes as I would have liked to have had, but we're going to go through the plot points. I'm going to talk about a little bit more specific as far as things that I liked, things that I didn't like, things that I felt were a bit of a missed opportunity, or just some of my all-time favorite moments in this movie, which are some of the biggest moments we've had in a Spider-Man movie. So the film starts off right away where Spider-Man Far From Home ended, to where Mysterio has outed Peter Parker as Spider-Man publicly and framed him for his death. This movie starts immediately with that, with the Daily Bugle, with J. Jonah Jameson and J.K. Simmons, and I'm so thankful they got him back for that role. You know, going off, doing his J. Jonah Jameson thing. Spider-Man's a menace, and we gotta get him, and all blah, blah. And you start off with a very cool web-swinging sequence. The movie just kicks off, and you've got Peter Parker going, holy fuck, what's gonna happen? You got MJ down there in the streets. People start storming around, start questioning her, swoops in, takes her, and they just start swinging all through New York, trying to get away from helicopters and news reporters and going into the subways. Very cool web-swinging sequence. Going all the way to where he is now in safety. He's in his apartment with Aunt May, and Happy Hogan is there, and they're doing their little breakup thing, which I thought they had a pretty funny chemistry over the past two movies, those two characters, while news reporters and everything are closing in. And so essentially you've got Peter Parker and May and Happy Hogan and MJ and Ned all getting interrogated now about the events of Mysterio and his death, and Spider-Man and everything that's happened, basically ignoring everything that he did for the world in the Infinity War and Endgame, but just like, hey, you need to explain yourself. Now, I'm somebody that at the end of Far From Home, I really liked that direction to kind of leave us off cold and leave us wondering what's going to happen in the next movie. But unfortunately, the issue with this plot line that I've always had is that it's very hard to take that plot line seriously in the MCU, because everybody's secret identity is out. Everybody knows that Tony Stark is Iron Man. Everybody knows that Steve Rogers is Captain America, that Bruce Banner is Hulk, that Natasha Romanoff is Black Widow. I mean, everybody's secret identity is well known. Spider-Man, I guess, was the only one. And so making it this huge, shocking thing like, holy shit, now everybody's going to know who Spider-Man is. in this universe, unfortunately, that doesn't really hold a lot of weight. If this was in the Raimi universe, if this was in the Amazing Spider-Man universe, ho ho ho, that's a huge plot line. But in the MCU, that was always something where I'm like, but that's cool, but big deal. That's not a big deal at all in this universe. So there's one small issue that I had with that, and the other is that they don't really do anything with that plot line. It's resolved very quickly. I mean, you have everything that the movie sets up at the end of Far From Home and brought into this one. It's like, oh my God, Spider-Man's outed. There's even been posters where he's sitting there and Public Enemy #1 shows Peter Parker. And that's about 5% of this movie is that plot line, really. So I feel like they could have done more with it, but again, I think they kind of knew that in the MCU, you can't really take that plot line all that seriously, unfortunately. That's just one of the negative effects of having Spider-Man in the universe with all these other characters, is that he loses a bit of what's special about Spider-Man. And how this all gets resolved is one of the big secrets, one of the big reveals in this movie that unfortunately a lot of us knew, especially in light of apparently what was the most recent episode of Hawkeye, which I have not seen any yet, where Kingpin was revealed. You have Matt Murdock show up in Aunt May's apartment and is Peter's lawyer and gets all the charges dropped. Now, I loved the scene. I thought it was very cool. This was probably it was on par with some of the bigger reveals in the later part of the movie, the theater reaction. That was the first big one where he showed up on screen. You see the cane, and then you just hear, "Ooh!" and like 35 different people are like, "Ah!" and the whole theater gets into it. So that was a really cool reveal. It was a good place to use his character. I don't really know what that means for the future. I mean, for those of us that loved the Netflix Daredevil show, that tone does not mix with the MCU whatsoever. So I don't know if that was just their way of bringing them in and so they can kind of stick them in the junk drawer until they're ready to use them. I don't see Marvel utilizing Kingpin or Daredevil in the way that they were utilized, and I don't really want to see a watered down version of those characters either. So cool to see him in this movie, but I just don't know what that means. You know, I don't know what that means for the future of Daredevil. So I liked it. It just raised more questions for me. Then you have Peter and MJ and Ned all trying to apply to various colleges, with MIT being the one that they really want to go to. And they all get pretty much denied for all of them. And they have this big dramatic moment where they all open up their applications to MIT, and they're all denied because of their involvement with Spider-Man. So his public image is so tarnished that the college just denies all three of them just because of association. And so this leads Peter to go to Doctor Strange, which is the element of this movie that I liked the least. The setup of the No Way Home events, the multiverse, the different villains and everything. The trailer's already pretty much solidified. This is what the storyline's going to be. This is the setup. This is how everything kicks off. And I've never really been on board with it. It never really seemed that intriguing or that interesting to me. It just seems like a really silly, lazy way to get this off. So Peter goes to the, what is it, the Sanctorum? I'm forgetting the name of it, but Doctor Strange's lair, and tells him, is there any kind of a way that you can, go back in time? And he's like, dude, we just saved the universe. Like, I don't have the time stone anymore. And he's like, oh God, that's right. And so, feeling bad for him since he's still a kid and realizes how bad his life is now being screwed up, that his identity's been revealed, which again, they never really address that everybody else's identity's already been revealed. So he decides to throw him a bone. They go down, they do this spell to where Doctor Strange is going to erase the memory of the entire world, that nobody will remember that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. And so Peter starts to panic and starts to say, well, hang on, my Aunt May should know, and hang on, my girlfriend should know, and my best friend Ned, and then the Avengers, they should know. And he keeps altering the spell to the point where the spell gets corrupted. It goes nuts. Doctor Strange contains it just in time and locks it into this little box and basically tells him, get the fuck out of here. Like, you're an asshole, you're an annoying little prick, get out of here. And so Peter says, okay, well, that didn't work, whatever. So I'm going to try to handle this myself. And there's even a line that's pretty good. And it kind of shows that he is still a kid and is still kind of ignorant, where Doctor Strange is like, so have you called the admissions? And he's like, you can call them? And he's like, what the fuck, dude? So there's a great line where he says, you came to me to make a spell to alter the memories of the entire universe before you thought to pick up the phone and call. That was pretty funny. So I like that line. But Peter decides to go and talk to this admissions lady to try to at least get his friends in, to try to get them to change their mind. And so they find out she's on the way to the airport. He's web swinging, and he gets all the way onto the highway, and he's got a nice little suit, and he goes up to her car and starts to talk to her. And right in the middle of his conversation, that spidey sense goes off, and he looks off into the distance, and out of nowhere, you start to see these rumbles, kind of like the T-Rex in Jurassic Park, and people are running, and you get the octopus arms that come out from underneath the freeway and the bridge. And Otto Octavius, good old Doc Ock, played by Alfred Molina, shows up and is yelling at him like, "Peter, where's my machine? The power of the sun in the palm of my hands. What have you done with it?" Letting us know that he has been yanked from his universe before the final, 5 minutes or so of his altercation with Spider-Man, to where Spider-Man reaches Dr. Octavius and gets him to take control of his arms again. He gets him while he's still in villain mode. And so there's a great sequence there, a great classic Doc Ock sequence where he's throwing vehicles and going at him at this bridge, and then they go underneath the bridge and he's using his arms to chase at him. Eventually gets his ass dead to rights, throws him against the wall, and his nanosuit helmet comes off, and he realizes that this is not the Peter Parker that he knows. And right off the bat, I gotta tell you that Alfred Molina is one of two villains here that I just thought were fucking amazing. I mean, I'm biased because I'm a Raimi fan and I love those movies. And so the villains from that universe are the ones that I'm gonna be looking forward to the most, namely him and Green Goblin. But I just thought he was fantastic in here. I don't think he missed a single beat. It's like he walked off of the set of Spider-Man 2 and immediately just picked up where he left off here. And I think that was awesome. That was one of the biggest moments, the biggest pieces of this movie that just really felt right. And so they had this whole conversation where Peter's so confused, where he's like, "Yeah, I'm Peter Parker, what are you talking about?" And Doc Ock rips off part of his suit, and the nanotechnology in his suit starts to corrupt all of his octopus arms, and Peter's able to take control of it with his suit. So now he has Doc Ock dead to rights. And just as you see a pumpkin bomb thrown into the street, and you hear that iconic "ah, ha, ha, ha" laugh, and Green Goblin starts to come through the fog, he gets warped out of nowhere. And Doctor Strange pulls him and Dr. Octavius into like this little basement lair, to where he's already got Lizard captured. Now Doc Ock is captured, and he tells Peter like, "Hey, the spell is contained, but there was a tear in the space-time continuum, and there was a tear in the multiverse, and everybody that knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man is now converged in our universe. So all of the villains of all the previous iterations of Spider-Man are now here, or most of the villains." And this kicks off what has been advertised as this movie. And we're still just in kind of the first act. This movie has only been advertised as all these villains are coming after Peter Parker. That's the story of the film. And so here, after talking with Doctor Strange, they start to come to this understanding that we have to get all these villains, we have to round them all back up so that we can send them back to their universe. And so this is where you get that, go and Scooby-Doo this shit line. And that is the moment, that's kind of in a nutshell, my issue with some of the humor of this movie. I think that there's some jokes that are awesome and that are totally nailed, and there's lines like that that's just so MCU brand humor that I'm just getting kind of wore thin on. I mean, the MCU has great humor most of the time, but every single MCU movie has a little bit too much humor, just about. The Iron Man movies are pretty much an exception to that, because you want Tony Stark to be riffing the entire time, but there is more movies that could use less humor in the MCU than not. And this is one of them, where I feel like they just throw every single joke they can think of at the wall, and hopefully more than half of them stick. Which they do, but then the half that don't stick, you're just like, oh, you didn't need that. So the whole Scooby-Doo this shit line doesn't even really make sense, but you have Peter Parker and Ned and Mary Jane now kind of teaming up together to hunt down, find, and capture any other villains that have made it through the multiverse. And right after that, we had this sequence to where Peter is swinging between all these power lines and ends up in this field in the middle of nowhere, to where he sees Electro, who's still kind of in the blue phase form, and as well as Sandman. Sandman is also there, Flint Marko from Spider-Man 3. Now, these two villains are not necessarily villains that I would really be overly excited about seeing again. Flint Marko, I think, is one of the weakest, if not the weakest, of the Raimi villains, but I still liked him. And Electro, if you saw my review, you know my thoughts on that. I thought that there was aspects to how he looked and aspects to the special effects and the fight scenes that I liked, but I thought the character was fucking ridiculous. And so you get these two characters, and Flint Marko very much feels like he was dropped right out of Spider-Man 3 into this one, to where he's actually trying to do good. He's actually trying to connect with Peter Parker. He's like, hey, it's me, it's Flint Marko, because they came to that little understanding at the end of Spider-Man 3 where Peter forgave him. And so he's very much not a villain in this scenario. Electro is kind of teetering on the edge, to where he's not necessarily freaking out trying to kill Spider-Man, but he's also not completely a good guy either. And very quickly, we realize, after he's kind of absorbed some of the energy, that it changes the look of Electro away from that kind of transparent blue to a lot more focus on just Jamie Foxx's body. And they give him this little fireman suit and everything. Now, he's the villain that absolutely feels nothing like the previous iteration. And for a lot of people, I think that's actually a good thing. I'm on the fence about it, because I feel like this version of Electro is certainly a better version of the character than the one that we got in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but there needs to be a transitional point. If this is literally going to be the villain that is yanked out of that movie right before he disappears in the third act of that film, then he needs to act and feel like that character, and he doesn't feel or act like that character at all. Like, that character was nerdy and was vulnerable and had this whole obsession with Spider-Man. This version of the character is literally just Jamie Foxx being Jamie Foxx. Just riffing and throwing out jokes and quips and attitude. And like I said, I like this version better. If this was the first time we ever saw Electro, I would rather have this version than the one that we got in Amazing Spider-Man 2, but it felt foreign to me. Now, that was one of my negatives in my spoiler-free review, is that some of the characters that are brought into this don't really feel like the characters that they were. And there's more that I'm going to be talking about. So I like this whole sequence. I like the setup. I like the look of Electro. It's different. Eventually, towards the end of the film, we get the full-on comic-accurate Electro with the little star thing going on. But so I like these two villains being brought back. So Peter warps them back in, and the only villain left is now Norman Osborn, who is shown in an alleyway where the Norman side of his personality has now taken back over. And he's hiding the glider. He's taken off his, his bodysuit, the green suit. He's taken the helmet off, and he looks, and the helmet is talking to him, just like it did in Spider-Man 2002, to where the evil side of him, the Goblin side of him, is talking to him, and he's seeing it in the mask, and he demolishes the mask. And so that was the MCU's way of saying, all right, enough of that Power Ranger suit shit. Now we're moving on to something else. And as much as I have nostalgia for the 2002 Spider-Man, and as much as his suit is very much a big piece of that, it's a good move to give him a different look, because that suit has never really looked good. So Norman, now in full control of himself, is lost. He's confused. He eventually finds Aunt May in this feast building, like a soup kitchen, and asks for her help, and Peter ends up going there, and they meet Norman, and they figure out that he's another one of these villains, and he's the first one that feels like he's connecting with Peter on a human level, to where he actually feels vulnerable, like somebody that we should help. And so eventually he's warped back into Doctor Strange's little lair again, to where all the other villains are now locked up behind these little force fields. Norman Osborn is the last one. And Doctor Strange just immediately puts Norman Osborn into one of these little force field jails, and tells Peter that these guys are all the people that know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man from other multiverses. We have to send them back. And Peter's like, well, wait, he says that, Otto Octavius keeps saying, like, Norman Osborn's dead. Norman Osborn's a ghost. Norman Osborn, he died years ago. And they find out that all of these villains are fated to die either by Spider-Man's hand or fighting Spider-Man. Because, in the Raimi films especially, they kind of got around that. Green Goblin killed himself. Doc Ock kind of killed himself. But it's in the fight of Spider-Man that eventually leads to their death. And so Peter wants to help them. Peter wants to prevent this, while Doctor Strange doesn't really give a fuck. Doctor Strange just wants to heal the universe, put all this behind him, and move on to the events of Doctor Strange 2. And so you have a bit of a battle of wills, a battle of morals here, to where the guy that should be the responsible adult that should have never done this fucking spell in the first place just wants to wipe everything clean and say to hell with it. They made their bed, they got to go lie in it. And Peter, being the eternal optimist, wants to try to cure them of all of their different powers, all their different plagues and curses, and send them back to their universe so that they at least have a fighting chance of not dying. And so then you have Peter Parker versus Doctor Strange for a sequence, which was a nice, fun sequence. This was the most fun sequence involving Doctor Strange, to where he webs the little box, and Doctor Strange is like, don't. And he follows him out into the street and keeps using these portals to where he tries to swing and ends up swinging right back down towards Doctor Strange. And a lot of fun physics in that scene. Eventually does that little palm thing and knocks him out of his body, and then Peter somehow is so strong to still be dodging Doctor Strange in his uninhabited body, which they didn't really give context to why that is, but it was still fun to watch. And eventually him and Doctor Strange have this fight that leads into the mirror universe and all the different inception effects and, buildings on top of them and below them and kaleidoscopes and trains that are converging. Very cool, awesome special effects, a very cool sequence. Eventually leading to Spider-Man webbing up Doctor Strange using like mathematic geometry to figure out how his universe works, and then leaves him trapped in the mirror universe while he pursues his idea of trying to cure all of these villains and give them a fighting chance. So you have all of them at that point that he takes all of them and sneaks them all into Happy Hogan's apartment, leading to the plot point of this movie that I think I roll my eyes at the most, because it's so convenient and so contrived, and it's just like, dude, can this guy get out from underneath the fucking boot heels of Tony Stark? So you have all these villains in Happy Hogan's apartment, and we're going to cure all of you of these powers. And we can do it easily because we got a magic Tony Stark box in the back room that's just fucking sitting there collecting dust. And all I got to do is type into it, Green Goblin cure, and it just makes it for me. And Dr. Octopus cure, and it just makes it for me. No. It doesn't tank the movie. This isn't something that drops it like a whole star or anything, but that is just such a bullshit convenient solution to the problem that I just can't help but roll my eyes. And once again, it takes away from how awesome, how smart, and how great of a character that Peter Parker is and Spider-Man is, because he always has to be propped up by one of the Avengers. You had Homecoming, to where he's Iron Man Jr. You had Far From Home, to where he's very much being propped up once again by Tony Stark with these glasses, and propped up a little bit by Mysterio. And then you have this movie to where it felt like Doctor Strange was going to do that, and then I was relieved that he didn't. But yet again, the reason we're able to save everybody is because Tony Stark decided to make this fucking magic box in his off hours, and we just happened to conveniently have it laying in the back. Rant over regarding that. But nonetheless, they create this little cure for Dr. Octopus, which is the little inhibitor chip that was on the back of his neck that blew up, that allowed the arms to control him rather than the other way around. And they fix that. They put it in like a new, almost like a with the acupuncture or something, like the needles go into his spine. And Dr. Octavius is now back. Doc Ock is gone. And I liked that, because if any of the villains should go back to being a good guy, it's him. Because he was always good. He was just corrupted by these arms. And the fact that he was the villain in Spider-Man 2, which is the only villain of any of these movies that I can think of, that by the end chooses himself not to be a villain. It's not like Spider-Man has to kick his ass until he dies or he accidentally kills himself like Green Goblin. Doc Ock was able to overcome the arms himself, so this just allowed him to get there a little bit quicker. So I like the fact that he's the one who's cured. And you have this little box that's going on to Electro, and is starting to take away all of his power, and it's like this little ticking clock, and as long as all the lights get all the way to the end, his powers will be cured. And he's making all these different things, and all the while, the Green Goblin side of Norman Osborn is starting to take back over, or is already fully taken back over, and his spider sense is going nuts. He eventually webs the hand of Norman, and you get that great Willem Dafoe performance to where he just switches on a dime and goes to that maniacal Green Goblin again, and convinces all of the villains that they don't need to be cured, that they're gods among men, and there's nothing wrong with them. And everybody but Dr. Octopus starts to lose their mind and starts to fight their way out of this situation. You got Electro that pulls the arc reactor out of that box and sticks it on himself. Now he's got endless supply of extreme power. And you have this great sequence where they're all blowing up this building, and you have J. Jonah Jameson, who is trying to catch him in the act of doing something, where he shows up there and they're filming the building while Spider-Man is getting thrown out the window and trying to contain all these villains. And eventually leading to this great scene, one of the best scenes, certainly the most dramatic part of the movie, to where all throughout the film you have Aunt May, who admittedly up to this point in these Spider-Man movies has basically just been reduced to the hot aunt, which I'm not necessarily offended by, but I can understand somebody feeling like that's a little bit of a shitty evolution of that character. I love Marissa Tomei, and my God, is she not one of the most gorgeous women on earth. But that's all they've really done with her character, is she's the hot Aunt May, and everybody wants her. So this movie actually starts to give her a little bit more context for how she really can affect and how she really can mentor and guide Peter as his aunt. And so all throughout the movie, there's all these things to where she keeps basically telling him, like, you have a responsibility to use your power for good. And we get to this point in this sequence to where the building's kind of collapsing and all these villains are converging on this building and trying to escape, and Green Goblin's being maniacal and running all around and trying to teach Peter that, you know, he's ill-fated, basically. And I don't remember what happens first, if Green Goblin delivers the fatal blow to Aunt May with his glider, or if she says this line first. So you have the big, with great power comes great responsibility line, only this time it comes from Aunt May, right before her death. And this entire sequence, on paper, if you had told me that they were doing this, I don't think I would have been on board with it. I would have been like, that's stupid, that's weird, why is she saying it and not Uncle Ben? But in the moment, the way that it was delivered by the actors, the way that it was placed in that moment in the story, the way that they kind of set it up throughout the movie with these little hints at her trying to get him to do the right thing, I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was brilliant that they took something that, because we had the Raimi universe with the classic Spider-Man origin story, then we had the Mark Webb universe where they had to try to redo that origin story but made these silly little pointless lateral moves to try to make it feel different while it felt exactly the same. And they decided not to even bother with that with the Tom Holland Spider-Man. So Spider-Man Homecoming, well, Civil War, I guess, would be the first time we see him. Uncle Ben's already dead. He's already got his powers. He already has his suit. So we skip over all the shit that pretty much everybody and their mother already knows. And that has always felt like a void in the Tom Holland Spider-Man to me. Not necessarily to the point where I felt like we needed an origin story, but there always felt like these classic Spider-Man elements, these classic pieces of his story and his character that just never felt present in any of his movies. Like Uncle Ben, like the great power comes great responsibility line and philosophy that he takes. And just, you never really felt like Uncle Ben was even a big piece of his life. He was never even really referenced that much that I can remember. And so I've always felt like it was odd that they didn't address that, or they didn't have some piece of that storyline in these movies. And when they finally reveal in this film that it was not done that way, I don't know if they chose to do this a long time ago and they already had this planned out, or if they decided now is the time and this is the way we're going to do it, but when they finally got to this scene to where Aunt May becomes that tragic mentor figure in his life, to where she gives him this line, she gives him this philosophy, this lesson, you know, this guiding light for who he needs to be in the future right before her tragic death, I thought that was awesome. I thought that Marissa Tomei did amazing in the role for this, and I thought that Tom Holland by far is the best that he has ever been as Spider-Man in this movie, and this whole sequence in the aftermath is one of the big reasons why. And so the fact that Green Goblin's the one that did it too, I thought was so important, because something that I have said, if you watched all my reviews over the past couple of weeks regarding the Raimi trilogy and the web series, the Web 2 films, is that Green Goblin, for being the character that is very much the Joker of the Spider-Man world, the arch nemesis of Spider-Man, the one that has corrupted and caused chaos and death and tragedy the most in his life, we've never really gotten that version of Green Goblin. We've never really gotten enough from the character to really go there. As great as I thought Willem Dafoe did in the first movie, he was only there for one movie, and he didn't really do anything that really altered his life, aside from put that rift between him and Harry. The fact that we got that version of Norman Osborn back here, that version of Green Goblin back, and he caused all the chaos that he did in 2002, and now he delivers the fatal blow to Aunt May, who is the Uncle Ben of this Spider-Man universe, I thought finally filled that void. We finally have the Green Goblin that quite literally is the biggest and the worst villain that Spider-Man has ever and will ever encounter. So I love the way that they framed that in the story. I loved the look of Norman Osborn with the hood and a little bit more of a classic Spider-Man look, where it's not the green costume, it's just a maniacal guy, and Willem Dafoe's smile and the way that he contorts his face is the way that the Goblin side of it comes across. I thought that was perfect. So I loved all of that. I thought that that was absolutely a brilliant creative decision, having Aunt May be the Uncle Ben of this universe and finally fill that void that we've had, that I've felt in the Tom Holland Spider-Man. And so, that is the first half of the film for the most part. And then we have, everything after this is all the fan service. This is where everything goes nuts. So while Peter is off on his own, sitting on the rooftop in the rain, just feeling demolished and just feeling like he has let everybody down, he has caused all this death, he just unleashed all these villains on the world, he's doomed everybody. You have Ned and you have MJ in this in Ned's apartment, and he's messing around with the little ring that they stole from Doctor Strange, and they realize that they can see Peter if they do that. So they open up this portal. We need to see Peter Parker. And it opens up a portal and shows Spider-Man in this alley, kind of confused and walking around. And they're like, Peter, Peter! And he looks at him and runs towards the portal. And as he's approaching the portal, I'm telling you, you could feel the air get sucked out of the room in the theater, to where everybody was like, he jumps in, and all of us nerds just immediately recognize the difference in his suit. And so about a third of the theater was like, and making all these noises. And I couldn't even hear what the hell was going on as far as the dialogue that he had with Ned's aunt or whatever. And then Andrew Garfield just pulls his mask off, and it's Andrew Garfield, and everybody was like, yes! It was awesome. So just like with Endgame, these huge fan service moments, that was the biggest one up to that point, to where Andrew Garfield's there. And it was such a great moment. It was exciting. Like I said, you could feel the air get sucked out of the room, and everybody was like, oh my God, it's happening, it's happening. But that was also the moment that I had that sinking realization. I'm like, God damn, dude, if there was any possible way that they could have hidden that and could have just marketed this movie as something, like the way that they did Endgame, where they really didn't tell you anything about it, and we all would have experienced that in the theater without having any idea that it was coming. I don't even want to think about how much the theater would have just lost its mind. There probably would have been cheers and fucking popcorn and drinks getting thrown around and people high-fiving and screaming for like 5 minutes straight in this sequence. It was still awesome. It was still fun. It was still a great crowd and a great theater reaction to experience. But man, I really wish that could have been a surprise. But for most of us, that was something that we all but knew that was going to come at some point. So Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man is now in here. They dub him Peter 3. And he's trying to explain, like, hey, I've been lost. I'm from a different universe. I've been walking around trying to figure out what's going on. I've seen you guys and this and that. And the one thing that I will say regarding this sequence, one of the bigger negatives that I had in my spoiler-free review, which I talked about earlier with Electro, was that some of the characters brought back from these other universes felt very foreign to the version of those characters that we already know and love. Andrew Garfield was the biggest one for me. I still enjoyed him. I still enjoyed his performance, and I loved the fact that he was there. He felt nothing like his version of Peter Parker. Nothing. There's one scene in the movie where he feels that way. We're about to talk about it. But every other thing where he's quipping and kind of being put into that MCU goofy humor situation where, can you go get that cobweb on the roof over there? On the ceiling? Something about his dialogue, something about his attitude, something about his presence on screen just didn't feel like the Peter Parker from the Amazing Spider-Man films. It just didn't feel right to me. And I can't exactly put my finger on it. I would need to watch it again to give you specifics. I don't know if I'm alone in that. I don't know if I'm in a minority with that. I don't know if everybody was just so excited that he showed up that nobody else really cared or even really honed in on that. But the whole sequence in this apartment, it just felt off to me. And so you have the goofy thing where he walks across the ceiling to pretend to prove that he's Spider-Man. Like he jumps up and grabs the ceiling, and then MJ's like, "That's not enough. I need to do something else," which was fun. You know, that was where MCU humor is like it's working okay, but we don't necessarily need this to be a funny scene. This should be awesome. And then they open up and they try it again, and my boy Toby walks through, and just as loud as Andrew Garfield, when that thing opens up and you see somebody in street clothes, again, everybody, it's him! That's what I wanted. Like, I love Andrew Garfield. He's definitely the best actor of the three, and I appreciate a lot of aspects of his two Spider-Man films, but I'm a Tobey guy. I'm a Sam Raimi guy, and so Tobey Maguire showing back up as Spider-Man was like a Christmas gift for me. So him showing up in street clothes and feeling a lot more true to his version of the character. It still felt like there was a little bit of MCU humor kind of being shoved into his dialogue a little bit, but he was a more campy version of the character anyway, and so he felt a lot more at home. He felt a lot more correct to me. So you have these two Spider-Men, you have MJ, you got Ned, you know, they have a little get together and some dialogue, to, you know, trying to figure out who they are, and they're, oh, we're Spider-Man from other universes. And eventually they go looking for Peter. And I was really worried in this scene that they were going to fuck it up with humor. But much to my pleasant surprise, they actually let this sequence be dramatic. To where MJ and Ned find Peter in the dark on top of this rooftop, like just demolished, and they just hug him and embrace him. And quickly up in the distance, he looks up and you see the two Spider-Men silhouettes up on this tower, which was a great shot. And they come down, and very quickly they kind of, you know, catch him up to speed, like, hey, we're Spider-Men from other universes. And he's like, guys, I'm sending you home. I don't want anything more to do with this. I'm not trying to help anybody. I'm done. I've caused so much chaos. And it was a good moment for the character. It was a good moment for the character to come to that realization and to finally just be like, I'm done. I'm not causing any more death or tragedy. And what I loved about this scene was that they weren't trying to do jokes. They weren't trying to be quippy. There wasn't like a, you know, Tom Holland like, what are these Spider-Man? What's going on? Or nothing goofy like that. All three Spider-Men bond over the death and tragedy that they've endured in their lives. To where Peter's talking about Aunt May and everything that she's done, and tells him, you know, that he's been doing all these things and walking away, and she's been trying to guide him, and starts the "with great power" line, and then Tobey Maguire does that Tobey Maguire thing where his eyes get really big, and he finishes the sentence for him. Comes great responsibility. And he's like, how did you know that? That's what my Uncle Ben told me on the day that he died. And they realize that they have that synergy with each other, that their universes have lined up in that way, have synced up in that way, and kind of bond in that moment. And then they address Andrew Garfield to where he adds his bit of tragedy regarding Gwen. And this was the best scene with Andrew Garfield. The one scene that felt like his character. That felt like his version of Peter Parker literally getting taken from his universe and dropped into this and didn't miss a beat. To where he has this really emotional delivery talking about Gwen Stacy. He's like, she was my MJ. I tried to save her and I couldn't, and I've never been able to forgive myself for it. I've tried to move forward, and then I've noticed that I stopped pulling my punches. I noticed that I've become more vengeful. And then they also kind of bond over the futility of revenge, to where Tobey Maguire talks about how the guy that killed Uncle Ben, that he wanted him to die, and he got what he wanted, and nothing changed. And Tom Holland is talking about wanting to kill Green Goblin for what happened. And I just thought that was an amazing sequence between the three of them. Probably the best sequence with all three Spider-Men. That's not like a big fan service action scene, just like character moments. That was great. That was the best part. And they kind of set up this whole thing about Tom Holland's vengeance and how the other two Spider-Man, like Andrew Garfield has this line about, I don't want you to end up like me. I don't want you to go down that road like I did. And I was on cloud nine during that whole sequence. I just thought that everything that they did, being able to take away all of the goofiness and the comic bookiness and the lighthearted humor and everything the MCU always has, and just have this dramatic, deep character interaction between these three versions of Peter Parker, that was the biggest success of the movie for me, was that sequence. I wanted more of that. As much as I love action sequences, that was what was most important to me. So quickly they get on the same page with each other. They light a bit more of a fire into Tom Holland. He kind of has this rejuvenated desire to resolve this situation, not just send everybody back with this little magic button. And so it sets up this whole sequence to where all three Spider-Men decide to make cures for all their respective villains. Now, while there is some really good humor in this sequence, and there's some really funny interactions between the three Spider-Men, there's some really funny interaction with Ned, to where Tobey Maguire basically tells him about Harry Osborn, and he realizes that with all the other Spider-Man, in a certain way, he's almost fated to become a villain and try to kill Tom Holland, his version of Peter Parker. And so there's this great moment where he just has this blank look on his face, and he goes over and adjusts the computer and gets back. And in the comic books, Ned Leeds actually does become the Hobgoblin. So I don't know if that's something that eventually they'll explore, but it was a good humorous moment to where he's like, holy shit, all of their best friends tried to kill them and eventually became villains, like, whoops. So I really enjoyed that. But what I did not like about this sequence, which again goes back to the magic Tony Stark box, is the contrived writing and the convenience of, we're just going to go in this lab for an hour and create cures for all of our biggest supervillains. And it's just like, dude, if it was that fucking easy, why didn't you do it in your own movies? You know what I mean? Like, they're in this lab, and they literally are just like, all right, well, I'm going to create an anti-serum for Green Goblin, and, the only one that made sense was Andrew Garfield, where he's like, oh, I'll do Lizard. I've already fucking cured him once before, which technically Gwen did, but that made sense. They created this serum, this anti-serum that rained down on Kurt Connors and cured him. So that one's like, we've already done this shit before. All the other ones, especially Green Goblin, it's just like, dude, if you could just come up with an anti-Green Goblin cure that quickly, to just... why didn't you use that on Harry? Why didn't you use that on Norman? And so, I don't know. Again, it didn't tank the movie. It wasn't like it derailed it to where I'm mad now. I just went along with it. It was fine. But just in a spoiler review, I try to give more context for things that stood out to me, good and bad. That was something that, once again, like the magic Tony Stark box, where I'm like, come on, guys. Like, this is like a fucking cartoon at this point. Big, dramatic, huge, epic situation, all these supervillains. We're just going to go in a lab and cure all of them. Nonetheless, a lot of great humorous moments in that sequence, and they get cures for all the different respective villains. They go to the Statue of Liberty, which is now being fitted with the Captain America shield instead of the torch. And we have this setup where he's trying to draw all these villains to this Statue of Liberty construction site, because he has that little spell box and knows that they all want to destroy it so that they don't get sent back to the universe and killed. And so this is where you get all of your fan service payoff, where you get all the different Spider-Man fighting all these different villains, and so many great shots to where all three of them jump off at the same time and web swing, and it was just, the crowd was going nuts during these sequences where you see all three of them doing all their acrobatics and everything. So on an action level, on an excitement level, this whole sequence was fucking awesome. It was just magical to watch. Just to think that you have all three Spider-Man together on screen, and the whole time you're just in awe. You're like, man, this is fucking badass. So, and before, actually backing up a little bit, before the actual villains hit, there was another great moment of humor, which would have felt odd if they did not address this whatsoever. So I'm glad that they did and made a good joke out of it. To where they realized that Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man actually has organic web that shoots out of his actual arm, while the other two had to make web shooters. And so there's like this jealousy between them. They're like, what the, like, dude, Andrew Garfield has a great line where he's like, I constantly run out of web. I got to go create it in a lab. It's a fucking pain in the ass. And Tobey Maguire's like, you guys, you can't do this? That's weird. And they start making jokes like, does it ever run out? Like, does it come out of other parts of your body? Like, you know, so I really enjoyed that. That was probably the biggest laugh that my theater got, including myself. So that was a great setup. And while they're fighting all this, there's another couple of good moments of humor to where they all come down and they're just getting their asses kicked. And Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are like, look, we don't really know how to fight as a team. Like, we're always solo here. And in a really smart way with the writing, Tom Holland is able to stand up and be the leader, which would have been hard to justify why he is leading them, aside from the fact that this is his movie, being that Tobey Maguire is the more seasoned Spider-Man. But they wrote in this nice detail to where he's like, hey, I'm an Avenger. Like, I'm used to working with teams. Like, I can get us together. And there's a good moment where Andrew Garfield's like, awesome. What's an Avenger? Or it might have been Tobey Maguire. But nonetheless, they don't know what the fuck the Avengers are because in their universes, it's just Spider-Man. So really good humorous moments there too, where they start to work as a team and they're like, okay, you go for that villain, I go for this villain. You get that great shot from the trailer that they digitally removed the other two Spider-Men, where you got Sandman and Electro and the Lizard all leaping, and all three Spider-Man leaping towards them and hitting them at the same time. And meanwhile, I mean, they're starting to one by one cure all these characters. You know, they cure Sandman, they cure the Lizard. Doc Ock eventually shows up and seems menacing at first, which I already knew was a ruse, but he does a great job at playing that dynamic of the character where he shows up, acts like he's going to help Electro, and then actually seizes Electro and puts the cure onto him, taking him out. So now it's pretty much just Green Goblin at this point that's still left. And you get these moments to where now that things have calmed down, despite all the stuff still going on, to where Tobey Maguire gets to have this great moment with Alfred Molina, to where he shows up and he's like, Dr. Octavius, and he's like, oh my God, Peter, like, you're a man. You know, Tobey Maguire is like, what, in his 50s at this point. And so that was a really good moment. You get this nice moment of reconciliation between Andrew Garfield and Jamie Foxx's Electro, to where Electro was like, you know, I'm going back to being a nobody, and Andrew Garfield says, you were never a nobody, and trying to appeal to what made him a villain. And there's another great humorous line here to where Jamie Foxx says, you know, Spider-Man, you're this idol, you're this icon, and I kind of always hoped you were black. And Andrew Garfield's like, oh, I'm sorry, man. And it was a really good, smart moment. Again, like, being that this is just such a dynamic scene, I can tolerate humorous moments when everybody should be on edge if it's a really good line, and that was a really good line. So I like the fact that they get these moments to where each Spider-Man gets to kind of address one of their main villains and kind of give some closure there between those two characters, presuming that we're never going to see these characters again, which, never say never. Then, eventually you have this sequence, which, in my review, another negative that I had was that it felt like there was some moments regarding characters that they kind of fast-forwarded through that should have been bigger moments. And this was the main one that I was talking about, to where Green Goblin shows up, starts attacking the Statue of Liberty. MJ and Ned, unfortunately, had to go through the portal and be in this situation instead of staying in the safety of their apartment. And so the scaffolding starts to collapse. MJ falls off of the tower in that classic way that Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy before her did. And she's falling, and Tom Holland dives for her. And there's debris everywhere, and he gets this close to her, and then he gets knocked out of the way by Green Goblin. And immediately Andrew Garfield's like, no! And jumps off and does the dive bomb, catches her and saves her. And then he's just like, are you okay? And she goes, yeah, and then the scene's over. This should have been a pinnacle moment of the movie for me. This should have been something that had been left to breathe and left to marinate a little bit. The slow motion that we got with the Tom Holland trying to save her, I feel like we should have gotten that exact same treatment of Andrew Garfield, to where he just has that determination in his eyes and he's reaching forward and diving through stuff like nothing is going to stop him from saving her the way that he failed to save Gwen Stacy. But it just felt so quick. Even to the point where he finally saves her and he's just like, are you okay? And she goes, yes. And there's you don't really get this moment to really see the character reflect on the fact that he, in a certain sense, has redeemed himself. In a certain sense, he's made up for the fact that he failed to save Gwen by saving MJ. I mean, that's what that scene's trying to come across. That's what that scene is trying to establish. And for a lot of people, that was probably enough. And I'm not saying that it fails as a scene. It's still nice. It's a good detail. But I just felt like that's such a huge, pivotal moment for that particular Peter Parker that the movie should have paused on it a little bit and should have made that more of this big emotional sequence similar to the death of Aunt May, to where we as an audience actually get to live in that moment for a little bit. But because so much is going on, because the Green Goblin fight and everything, all the action sequences and all the different characters, they kind of just have it happen and be over with. So I felt like that was a big missed opportunity. There was a big missed opportunity to make that a really pivotal, emotional moment for that character and for us as audience members. And now we're pretty much at the point to where the only villain is left is Green Goblin. Tom Holland is going at him with everything that he has. They're fighting on the little shield, and he is going for blood. He is trying to literally kill Green Goblin, which is the first moment that you've ever felt that vengeful heart from Tom Holland, which again was a big step up, a big moment of growth with this character for me. And you have the other two Spider-Man that see that he is about to go too far. And this is a moment that I was mixed on, because you had the whole setup in that sequence before where they're all talking about grief. And you had Andrew Garfield focus on it the most, to where he's emotional and he's in tears and he's talking about how vengeful he became and how he stopped pulling his punches, and it just destroyed who he was. And he made a point to say, I don't want that to happen to you. I don't want you to follow down that road that I went down that leads to nothing but darkness. And, you know, Tobey Maguire had a similar moment in one line where he talks about how I wanted this guy to die for killing Uncle Ben and I got my wish and nothing ever changed. But to me, it felt more important, it felt more standout and more of something to focus on when Andrew Garfield was saying his lines. And so right at the moment where Norman Osborn is down for the count, Tom Holland grabs the glider, walks up to him and gets ready to stab him with the glider. And Tobey Maguire swings in and grabs the glider and stops him and looks him in the eyes and gives this silent look. And they kind of had this moment of quiet realization that you are not going to do this. You're not going to go down that path. I'm saving you from this. And Tom Holland kind of understands in that moment. Right before Green Goblin stabs Tobey Maguire. And my heart skipped a beat because I was like, no, don't kill him. I can't handle that. I can't handle that right now. You can't give him back to me just to take him away. Luckily, they didn't go that far with it. But nonetheless, this whole sequence happens. He stops him from killing Norman Osborn. He gets stabbed. And then Andrew Garfield throws the cure to Tom Holland, and Tom Holland stabs Norman Osborn with the cure and cures him of the Green Goblin forever. This was a great sequence and a great moment, but to me it felt odd that Tobey Maguire was the one that stopped him rather than Andrew Garfield. It felt like with the lead up that they had in that conversation that Andrew Garfield would have been the more appropriate Spider-Man to potentially give his life to stop Peter from doing that. I don't know if I'm alone in that. Some people might think it doesn't even matter because it's not like Tobey Maguire died. If Tobey Maguire died, this would be a much different conversation. But the fact that both of them lived, it just felt like, yes, they both gave a line that would directly lead into them doing that, but it felt like Andrew Garfield was a more powerful lead up to that. So that was just a note that I had. Not a negative or a positive, just something that a thought that I had when that happened. And so now they have saved everybody. And all the while during all this is going on, eventually Ned let Doctor Strange out of his mirror trap, and Green Goblin, right before they had the big fight with Spider-Man, destroyed the box. And so you start to see all these tears in the sky to where the multiverse is starting to bleed into their universe. And you see these little silhouettes of certain villains. I recognize Kraven the Hunter in one of them. The other two were too fast. I'm sure there were other iconic Spider-Man villains. But Doctor Strange, this whole third act is regulated to doing his Doctor Strange thing and trying to contain the tears. So now that all the villains are taken care of and everything's good, Peter goes up to Doctor Strange, and Doctor Strange is like, they're all coming, Peter. And they come to the realization that the only way to stop it is to do a spell to where everybody in the world forgets Peter Parker. Remembers who Spider-Man is, but forgets who Peter Parker is. And so you have this really nice emotional payoff, this emotional conclusion to the movie to where he decides to let Doctor Strange do that, gives up his relationship with MJ, gives up his friendship with Ned Leeds, and sends all the villains and his 2 new Spider-Man friends back to their own universe at the expense of nobody on Earth knowing who the hell he is. And I gotta say, the moment where he tells MJ, Zendaya, and hopefully I pronounced her name correctly or somebody's gonna correct me, but MJ and Peter have this moment where he tells her, and she's crying, and she's like, no, like, I'm gonna remember you. I don't want this to happen. I don't care. I want you. And admittedly, up until this point, like as far as on-screen Spider-Man couples, I'm probably the least invested in Tom Holland and Zendaya. As for all the flaws that we have in the Mary Jane in the Raimi universe, obviously I love those movies, so I'm more closely tied to them. And the best aspect to the Amazing Spider-Man films is Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. So up until this moment, or at least in this movie, I never really was all that invested in Tom Holland and his version of MJ. But this movie changed that. I thought that they had a great chemistry with each other, a great dynamic. I think they actually are a couple now, so they have that added advantage that Andrew Garfield had with Emma Stone as well. But that whole conclusion to their relationship, if that is in fact the conclusion, I thought was acted really well between them. So Doctor Strange does the spell, everybody gets sent back, the slate is now wiped clean, everybody forgets about Peter Parker. And so, in like the falling action, the conclusion, the final act of the film, you have Peter Parker alone throughout New York City for presumably a few months, at least weeks. And he's trying to get an apartment. He's got this shitty little apartment to himself. And he decides to go and reintroduce himself to MJ and to Ned, and goes into the coffee shop that she works in. And he sees them get into MIT and just be so happy and safe that he decides not to rock the boat, that he decides not to reintroduce himself. He has these moments of hesitation to where he's ordering a coffee, and him and MJ kind of have that like moments like, do we know each other? There's something there. And he just kind of thanks her and leaves. And I thought that was a great note to leave the movie off with, to where like the Amazing Spider-Man 2, for example, would have resolved this and been like, you know, how they did at the end of the first film and the end of the second film, to where they introduce this conflict and then they resolve it minutes later. But they leave you on a down note to where everybody has forgotten Peter. And they end with this scene that made me so happy as a Spider-Man fan, and as somebody that has been critical of this being missing from the Tom Holland movies thus far. To where now the slate is wiped clean, Peter is all by himself, he's just Spider-Man, he's not an Avenger anymore, because none of the Avengers know who he is. He doesn't have MJ, he doesn't have Ned, and so it's just him, it's just a clean slate, to where he is now just a hero in New York. He makes his own suit, and it's the classic red and blue Spider-Man suit. They just show him, they show the sewing machine and scraps, and they show him swinging, and it's that classic look of Spider-Man. Despite how cool his suits have been, you don't get any better than that classic suit. And so he's swinging around with that suit. And the way that I interpreted this, and again, the future will tell whether or not I'm correct or not, is that this ending and movie really was made to wrap up his time in the MCU. And I think going forward, we're going to see him exclusively as a Sony character, and he's going to be doing things in New York. We're going to get classic Spider-Man movies now with Tom Holland's Spider-Man. No more big team-up movies, no more throwing in an Avenger here to kind of prop Peter up. Now he's on his own. Now he is fully a hero that embraces the with power comes great responsibility notion, that embraces his tragic life of heroism, and everything is wiped clean now for him to be the Spider-Man that I have wanted him to be for 3 movies now. As much as I like having the novelty of these team-up movies, I've always felt like the Tom Holland movies just lacked that classic Spider-Man approach, that classic Spider-Man appeal. And I didn't know if they were ever going to get there. I didn't know if that was in the cards. I didn't know if that was ever something that they wanted to do. And this movie makes me feel like now that is the direction that we're going to go. And I'm absolutely so excited that that is potentially the future of this character, because now I'm going to get a lot more of what I want from a Spider-Man film. We've gotten about all of the novelty that you can get out of the team-up movies and the other characters. Now we've done the multiverse movie with the different villains, different Spider-Man, and now it's time for Tom Holland to stand on his own and be the hero that Spider-Man should be, to where he is just great on his own. He doesn't need a super suit from Tony Stark. He doesn't need to have mentors and have people, you know, guiding him and doing all this stuff for him and giving him magic Tony Stark boxes to cure all of his villains. Now he's on his own. And I don't know if eventually he's going to get back with MJ, eventually Ned's going to come back, or if that's just them saying, okay, we're done with that. Now eventually he's going to meet Gwen Stacy, he's going to meet Harry Osborn, or any of the other classic characters, Felicia Hardy. I don't know. But the potential really excites me, to the point where just everything in this movie was just so fun and such a great experience for a Spider-Man fan. The fact that they were able to leave it on a note to where I am so excited and hopeful for what comes next, I have not felt that way since the Raimi films. As much as I enjoyed, to varying degrees, the Amazing Spider-Man films and these Tom Holland films, I've never walked out of any of them and been like, I cannot wait to see what happens next. This is the first time since the Raimi films. So I just thought it was amazing. I thought it was an amazing way to end it, and just as a classic Spider-Man fan, I just thought that was just such an amazing touch to have him in that classic red and blue suit, and everything is wiped clean for so many possibilities now. Now we have our two post-credit scenes, mid-credits and post-credits, excuse me, there's a difference now. So you go through the credits, and the mid-credit scene, I'm very mixed on, I gotta be honest. Like, they teased it at the end of Venom 2, Let There Be Carnage. You knew that eventually they were gonna converge paths. So you get Eddie Brock, who is in this Mexican bar, presumably, and he's asking this guy, like, okay, so in this universe we have all these heroes, like we got Avengers, and they're quipping back and forth about these heroes, and then you've got the Venom personality kicking in. And there was good moments of humor, but then the scene ends with, you know, whenever Doctor Strange is doing the spell is when this is happening, and he, you know, warps back to his original timeline in Venom, and they zoom in, and he left a little piece of the symbiote behind, which just kind of moves a little bit. And so presumably what this is to do is to set up an easy way to explain how Venom is in the MCU. I don't know if they're going to have their own version of Venom, or what the hell is going to happen, or if this piece of Venom is going to make it into the Tom Holland movies, which wouldn't necessarily make sense, because if Sony owns Venom, why wouldn't they just be in the same? So I don't know exactly what they're going to do. They left that behind so that somewhere they can put Venom or the Black Spider-Man suit or some version of a symbiote in one of these universes and not have to explain how it got there. My question in this, though, is that very clearly in the movie they established that anybody that is warped into this universe, the Tom Holland MCU Spider-Man universe, is somebody that knows that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Hence, all of the villains that Spider-Man has already killed are the ones that are warped in. Venom doesn't know who the fuck Spider-Man is, and he definitely doesn't know who the fuck Peter Parker is, so how does he get warped? I didn't quite understand that. Maybe somebody can explain that down below. I know it was fun to be able to have them, and that was kind of presumably set up Tom Hardy being able to be in a Spider-Man film, and we get Spider-Man and Venom finally in a good way. But with the logic the movie sets up, I was like, you know what? That doesn't make sense. That kind of, you cheated. You cheated to make that happen. So, I don't know. Let me know down below what you think about that, if you have an explanation for that. And what do you think the symbiote being left behind is going to lead to? Is that something for the MCU exclusively? Is that something for Tom Holland's Spider-Man movies going forward? Like, what are you getting out of that? Let me know. Maybe the most logical explanation that I could get, since Venom is just such a goofy character, is that eventually they want the Eddie Brock of the Tom Holland universe to become a different version of Venom. That's what I would presume. But let me know down below what your thoughts are. And then the post-credit scene was essentially a big, long trailer for Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, which looks cool. I'm most interested in this movie because Sam Raimi's directing it. That's really it. I didn't care for the first Doctor Strange movie. It was fine, but it's one of those MCU movies that I watched once and I've never really had the desire to go back and watch again. I thought that it was the most templated of any of them. So I've liked Doctor Strange a lot more in the team-up movies than I did in his original movie. But this one looks like it's going to be much more my type of film. It's got a little bit of a horror flavor to it. You have Scarlet Witch brought in here. And like I said, Sam Raimi, the fact that they got him to come back and do a superhero movie, that gives me endless intrigue into what this movie's going to be. So that's pretty much it, guys. That's all of my thoughts all the way through the plot of Spider-Man No Way Home. I don't really think I'm leaving anything out. If I had been able to watch it at home, maybe I would have had a little bit more in-depth thoughts. But for the most part, that nails all the different beats. For the most part, everything in this movie was just very fun, exciting, and very pleasing for me as a Spider-Man fan. A couple of hiccups along the way. I didn't like the setup. A couple of those contrivances with the Tony Stark box and the cures for all the villains I could have done without. I felt like Andrew Garfield felt like he was shoved into the MCU sieve to where he had to act like an MCU character when he really didn't feel like his character, except for that one moment where they were kind of bonding over death and everything like that. But I loved the movie. I had an absolute blast with it. I'm going to do a ranking tomorrow of all of the Spider-Man films, including Venom 1 and 2 and the Into the Spider-Verse movie. So look forward to that. And I'll probably rank all the villains too. I've got a couple of holes next week in between Matrix and Christmas where I can fit another ranking. So I'm probably going to rank all the live-action Spider-Man villains. But I really had a good time with No Way Home. So let me know all your thoughts, guys, on Spider-Man No Way Home. What are your thoughts for the future? Answer all those questions that I was asking throughout the review as well. Give me your own context down below. Now you can go wild with spoilers in the comment section. So let's talk about No Way Home down below. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you are a fan of Spidey, because we got a couple more ranking videos to come. And of course, in the future, for as many Spider-Man films as we get, I'm going to keep covering them. So please hit that subscribe button if you're a fan of this type of content. You got a lot more coming your way. Thank you guys for watching. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean that you have to be.